on the occasion of Art Basel Hong Kong, which is ongoing on site at the Hong Kong Convention Center, where we wish we were. My name is Isa Lorenzo. I'm the co-director of Silverlens Galleries Manila. And tonight we are talking to three artists, Pio Abad and Nicole Coson, who are joining us from London, and James Clar, who is joining us from down the street here in Manila. Pio is a veteran of Art Basel Hong Kong, while Nicole and James are new to the show. Nicole and Pio's work can be viewed on site at the fair at booth 1C18, which we share with Rossi and Rossi Gallery from Hong Kong. And James's work can be seen online at the Art Basel OVR. Today we're going to talk about the Philippine diaspora. The diaspora is not unique to the Philippines by any reach. However, almost 15% of all Filipinos live elsewhere. A trend among residents of a developing country to leave for better prospects, it is a result of modern globalization. For decades, artists have been part of this movement. Today, I'm speaking to second-generation Filipino-American artist James Clar and first-generation Filipino-UK artists Pio Abad and Nicole Coson about their practices, the importance of connecting to their roots, and the perspective that distance offers. So first, I'd like to introduce the artists. The first artist is Pio Abad.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Could we just have the four screens for the four artists, please, to my technical manager? Okay. So maybe I will just do a speaker. Okay. So good evening again. So I wanted to introduce you to Pio. Pio Abad, born in 1983 in Manila, lives and works in London. He began his art studies at the University of the Philippines before receiving a BA from Glasgow School of Art and an MA from the Royal Academy Schools, London. He has recently exhibited at the Honolulu Biennale, Hawaii, 2019, and the Gwangju Biennale in South Korea in 2018. Pio Abad's practice is concerned with the social and political significance of things. His work in a range of media, including textiles, drawing, installation, and photography, uses strategies of appropriation to mine alternative or repressed historical events, unravel official accounts, and draw out threads of complicity between incidents, ideologies, and people. Often taking on the form of domestic accessories, Abad's works glide seamlessly between these histories, enacting quasi-fictional combinations with their leftovers. So welcome, Pio.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eve.
Yeah, next artist is Nicole Coson. So Nicole, who is also in London, she's joining us from her studio. Nicole was born in Manila in 1992. She lives and works in the UK, and she's a Filipino artist who has recently completed an MA in painting from the Royal College of Art in London. She has been selected as part of the Bloomberg New Contemporaries 2020. Nicole's work operates between the anonymous and deeply personal, between a specific place in her personal history and anywhere at all. She creates works that seek to stretch and skew the viewer's ability to detect cultural precursors as identity and location blend into seamlessness, constructing a space which is both familiar and alien. Her latest works function as architectural interventions of physical space, each work serving as a doorway into a dimension between worlds and beyond time. So welcome, Nicole. Next artist is James Clar. James Clar, he was born in 1979 in the US. He lives and works between New York and Manila and is a light and media artist. His work analyzes the effects of media and technology on our perception of culture, nationality, and identity. He studied film at NYU and received his master's from NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. It was here that he began developing his own light systems to create visual sculptural works that combine light and technology. James's interest is in new technological production processes and their application to artistic narrative forms. His work often deals with the perception of reality and the information systems that create it. So welcome, James.
Hello.
Okay, can everyone switch their, can all the artists switch their mics on, please? Okay, so I'm going to start the discussion, and I wanted to ask the three of you who are here with us today. I wanted to ask you to let us know 3 things about your work or your practice that you feel very strongly about. So 3 things about your work or practice that you feel very strongly about. So let's start with Nicole.
Hi, yeah, so 3 things one of the things you already mentioned, that for me, my work's always attempted to function from in-betweens, between a specific space or a place in the Philippines or anywhere at all. Between the past and the present, something that's extremely personal and also universal. And I like to think that my practice straddles the fence between 2 or more opposing forces that are at odds, and something born from that tension. My practice looks to exist within that state of dislocation, kind of floating about that and suspended by that kind of energy. The second thing is that I'm a painter that uses printmaking techniques. I see the etching press as a tool for painting, because on one hand, printmaking as a technique is defined by its ability to create a reproducible image, and through working with monotypes, I attempt to bypass that. I like working with a series of predetermined steps and very technical processes to make my work. And I think that that's what's interesting about monotypes, is the way they capture time, because there's a very clear start and end. Unlike with painting, you don't really ever know when, it's really hard to determine when you're finished. But with monotypes, it's like when you pull the substrate off the plate, the image on the plate is just gone, and you can't make another one exactly like it. The third thing about my practice is that I make very personal work. I make works about my own lived experience. Sometimes that has to do with events in my life, childhood memories, but sometimes it also deals with anxieties and loss. I like to think that these are recorded within my paintings, and because to make these large paintings, I have to use my entire body, and I like to believe that energy becomes embedded in the works too. So those are my 3 things.
Great, thanks, Nicole. James, 3 things.
Yeah,
Let's wait for your video to come on, James. Okay, James, go ahead.
Yeah, so I studied film and animation. And then when I went to graduate school, then I kind of got into more kind of media theory. And it's kind of there that I started to kind of switch into light-based work. A lot of the early works in the first decade is just kind of light sculptures. I think I was thinking about like film and film as a light system. So I became interested in the idea that you could watch a film and have an emotional reaction to it, even though it's just light bouncing off of the screen. So it doesn't really exist, but you can interpret like characters and a narrative from something that doesn't exist. So I thought instead of using that system, then I can start to manipulate and develop my own kind of systems. So the background is like film, and then now I'm getting more into kind of cultural systems, which is what I'm doing more in Manila. I'm interested in kind of material and the kind of the narratives that go along with materials and those kind of systems, and how to manipulate that and use that either in installations, films, or sculptural works. And I'm very much interested in like the environment that people live in. I think like, yeah, I had a studio practice in Dubai and also New York, and then now I'm in Manila. And I think each of those environments kind of exposes you to different sets of conversations with like the different people that you're in conversation with there. And people have different perceptions of like who they are in each of those places. Yeah, I mean, culture is this kind of way that we try to make sense of what's around us, but it's something that's also invented. So I think like as artists, it's interesting to kind of understand where those kind of symbols come from, but also at the same time kind of like remix them or use them in kind of more unique ways.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, James.
Yeah.
Pio, are you ready? Let's get Pio's video on. Your turn, Pio.
My full body shot there.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it was interesting, selecting images for this talk in the context of a diaspora, because it allowed me to actually, I've been living away for so long. I think I left the Philippines in 2004. So it's been quite a while. It was interesting to kind of look through images and see, what threads have remained or have kind of strengthened over time. And the first work in this slide kind of presentation is actually a degree show work I did in my Glasgow years. So this was in 2007, and it's this red, white, and black drawing entitled Dog Eater's Discourse. So it imagines this world based on these creatures, and obviously these creatures are informed by Jessica Hagedorn's account of Philippines during martial law, but also this term dog eaters was like a pejorative term used by Americans to describe Filipinos during the Filipino-American War. And so actually, maybe that's the start, right? That at the core of my practice really is an investment in social political histories and how to kind of tell these histories through objects. So this, history, the kind of entwining of personal and political, the way that histories and ideologies are embedded within objects. I'm very much a firm believer in the art object as a way to kind of seduce the audience into discussion. And third, I guess the start of my work is always drawing. It's a way for me to map objects. It's a way for me to start planning things, but ultimately it's a way to kind of understand the world and understand these quite wide-ranging histories I'm dealing with through a process involving my body. So it starts with drawing, but then as you look at the works in these slides, it's also like I'm talking about, histories involving Margaret Thatcher, or histories of authoritarianism in Southeast Asia, or the kind of wider implications of neoliberalism. But I talk about them through a scarf, a vase, a handbag. So it's all objects that we deal with in a day-to-day, but living inside these objects are these networks of relationships that we have to navigate.
Thanks, Pio. So now that we've sort of gotten to know each other, I wanted to make sure that everybody, that the three of you know that you can ask each other questions. I think this is also this is our time to get to know, I guess, where we're coming from and why we're doing what we're doing, and this whole idea of a diaspora, it's about connecting to our roots. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask the three of you was, do you feel that the Philippines or Southeast Asia or even Asia as an origin or heritage is a point of contact for you, and if it is important to your practice or not? So who wants to start?
I'm happy to start. I mean, for me, I guess for people who have been aware of my practice, it's obviously foundational. The history of the Philippines in the last 50 years has been kind of at the root of all my visual investigations. So yes.
Okay. James, Nicole, any ideas?
I mean, I think my work can be quite personal and informed by my lived experience here in the UK, but as well as my life in the Philippines, where I grew up, where I first formed an art practice. But being Filipino is certainly a part, being Filipino is a part of the infrastructure of my identity. And it's one of the spaces that I occupy. I mean, I'm also a woman, a painter, a mother of a very charming mini Australian Shepherd. So these aspects of my life, maybe not so much the last one, do come to play in the thinking and making of my work.
Right. James?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of a new exploration. I grew up, in Wisconsin, so it's really kind of like a outsider there culturally. I think like we tried to be like really neutral growing up in the States at that time, like in the 80s. I think like we're trying to assimilate and not have too much prejudices like put against us. But I think like, as we get older, and especially how it is now, I think people are accepting of a wider spectrum of different cultures. And I think like instead of like trying to like hide those aspects, which in any case, as a minority in the US, you're never going to get away from it. Even if you act neutral, somebody's always going to treat you as a minority. So instead of like trying to ignore that, I think it's better to kind of own it, and I think like, being in the Philippines, is similar to like how I was living in Dubai. It's a matter of like just kind of exposing myself to the environment, a different set of information and different conversations with like the different artists here, and just kind of understanding like how that cultural information affects like how we act, not just as artists, but also in like kind of general society. So it's kind of new for me, but I'm excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, you brought up the idea or the of prejudice. So have the three of you felt any prejudice at all in your practices as contemporary visual artists?
I think for me, obviously there is structural prejudice and there is kind of the day-to-day, and obviously the kind of structural prejudices that you encounter, some kind of more subtle than others, is something you deal with as a person of color, living and working in a place like London. Although recently the government here has stated that apparently there is no structural racism in this country, which obviously is absolutely not true. But in terms of opportunities, I think I did the very strange decision of moving from Manila to Glasgow. I don't know, 2004. I'm an artist, so my math is not great. However many years 2004 was. And in some ways, that kind of the lack of Filipino having a context in Scotland was very useful, because it allowed me to kind of craft my own identity that's separate. I think to be a Filipino that then moves to London or moves to New York, to America in particular, where maybe there's a more kind of direct relationship between the Philippines and the US, but to kind of try and create your own artistic point of view as a Filipino in Scotland, for me was formative, because it allowed me to be, to really find that idiosyncratic voice that I'd like to think I have now.
Right. James, anything? I mean, you're...
Yeah, I mean, definitely, there's like a wide spectrum of prejudices I think you have growing up in Wisconsin and then moving to New York and then also in Dubai. But I think like what's interesting is like these kind of perceptions are, for me, what's interesting is that it's media and it's information, and that's all like external information. And so it's interesting about those systems, like where those systems come from, what technologies are used to kind of disseminate that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of where that interest comes in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with this idea, do you feel that, or where do you think the Philippines should be in terms of the global contemporary art conversation? I mean, do you feel like we are entering
right at the center?
We're right at the center? Why,
Right
Pio?
at the
What do you
center.
say?
Huh?
Why
No,
do
I
you
think,
say?
I think all these discussions surrounding, remapping the world through global South histories, we're right there. And I think that's certainly, I mean, it's more of a challenge here in the UK, perhaps, because, I deal with work that very much deals specifically with Philippine histories. And because there isn't that colonial link that is direct between the UK and the Philippines, as opposed to other countries in the global South, sometimes the work I make is viewed as just in terms of national histories, when actually it could be speaking about larger relationships, kind of more allegorical links, really. And I think I push for Philippine history to be recognized not just as a Southeast Asian narrative, but actually a narrative of, say, imperialism, a narrative of global economics, a narrative of a wider conversation surrounding political history. So yeah, I think in that regard, I think we are well positioned to be at the heart of things.
I think, yeah, you're very correct. And I wish that more people here would feel that way, because oftentimes we feel very, very isolated and very, very disconnected for a variety of reasons. I mean, the fact that we're an island country, even between provinces, I mean, you're from Batanes.
I'm from
I'm
Batanes.
from Mindanao. I mean, that's like, I don't know, 100 dialects separate us. But it's interesting to see your perspective as somebody who is able to navigate this, these worlds. And I wanted to ask James, does he feel the same way coming from the US?
I mean, I see things kind of in like a global conversation, like a global art conversation. So I think that there's no reason why the Philippines can't have like a strong platform, for the artists and for our voices. I mean, it's so diverse, like the ideas and the culture and the history is so diverse that it's I think that really fosters interesting conversations. I think the matter is just kind of, I mean, unifying that and having people coalesce and like working together to try to represent ourselves in kind of the global art platform,
Right. So Nicole has just been selected as one of the Bloomberg New Contemporaries with a show going on right now in London. And Nicole, would you say that the finalists with you, do you feel like it's a super diverse group of people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I'm very grateful to be able to show, I think it's such great, other great artists, young artists. And what I find kind of funny is that actually, if you search Filipino in the New Contemporaries website, it's me and Pio's name.
And it's showing my age because I was at New Contemporaries 12 years ago.
Yes, and it shows all the group shows that you were in. Like I think you were in 10 in 1 year in Glasgow. Very very active. I think that these institutions are looking out for a more diverse set of narratives. But actually, when you're talking about where the Philippines should be, I think that to me, it's not about finding an ideal position or like a vantage point. I think it's about having multiple points of entry from which to operate. And personally, I mean, I wish for my work to have this type of porousness. Sometimes I think about when Felix Gonzalez's tours, this idea of the artist as infiltrated. And I think there's many ways to interact with heritage. And I think that a multiplicity of approaches should be welcomed, and that any and all possibilities are conceivable.
Right. How important is it for you guys to be connected to the local here in the Philippines or in Asia?
I think it's interesting to think about local in the context of Hong Kong, particularly. I think that you introduced me as a veteran art vassal Hong Kong. But truly from 2013, when was the last time, to 2018, like for me, the times I would spend in Hong Kong during that period was really formative in terms of, I guess, building allies, building relationships and building these really important networks that have enabled my practice to kind of, maybe like as Nicole was saying, to not just be, to occupy multiple fronts. And there are, alongside Silverlens, one thing that has been really important to me are all these relationships with institutions that look at these kind of geopolitical networks, like from Parasite, Asia Art Archive, to Gasworks. And certainly these conversations have been key in like articulating my position, but also in knowing that you have this incredible support network that kind of enables you to be visible, but also challenges your discourse and really provides you a platform to talk about, your point of view and the relationship of that in terms of kind of global context.
Right. So, James, you've been in Manila for what, 3 months now?
Yeah, since March.
Yeah, and talking about the local, I mean, what has the local done to you?
in this amount of time?
Yeah.
How's it changed?
You're so busy.
Changed and tried to break me?
Every time you come to the Philippines, you're making work like crazy. So now that you've been here for a stretch of 2-3 months.
Is this the longest stretch, James, that you've spent in Manila?
Yeah, in one go. Yeah,
wow.
One go. Yeah, but I think from like a couple of years ago is when I started kind of popping back and forth pretty frequently. I started working with Isa and Rachel, and so that's when we started kind of working together. But this has been the longest stretch. And now the studio is here. It is based out of here. So I closed the studio in Brooklyn and shifted everything over here. Yeah. So this will be the home base.
You've moved to Manila.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow, brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's just kind of like diving in and just trying to immerse myself in the environment. I think like this trip was productive, but also it's tricky with COVID. So the lockdowns were happening, the curfews were happening, so movement was a little bit restricted. But it's been slowly opening up, and I've been making appointments to have conversations with all the other artists, with the gallery, and just kind of meeting up with them, having drinks. And I think it's like nice to see what other people are doing and just kind of generating conversations. I think like the pandemic is like really like the social aspect of art is like one of the greatest things. It's kind of how we kind of percolate ideas and kind of bounce things off of each other.
Right. Because you were saying when in one conversation that when you go, depending on where you are, you make work based on that geography.
Yeah.
So how would you say like Manila is different from New York or Dubai, or is it similar?
No, it's completely different. But the materials are changing and the mediums are kind of shifting a little bit. It's just a matter of like, what can you get your hands on, and what sort of like ability do you have to like either record film around the city or get like a film crew together, or you just try to find what sort of like, I guess, kind of materials or informations you can use to kind of manipulate.
Right.
But it's different. It is absolutely different. And I think like, the process will keep evolving the longer I'm here.
Right. So I'm just gonna, I want to talk to the audience for a second. So if any of you have any questions, please feel free to type them up in the chat box, and we'll get to the questions after we have our conversation, if we have time. When I wrote the text for this talk, Pio asked me to put in the last phrase, which is the perspective of distance. Okay, so I wanted to ask Pio and Nicole, what can you say about having a practice away from your families and the familiarity of the Philippines?
Well, I guess I've been in London for a while now. almost a third of my life. Like have my life here with my partner and our dog. But so it's difficult for me to kind of distinguish the experiences that I've had that are directly attributed to me being Filipino or my Filipino-ness. But I have noticed that in terms of distance, with the pandemic and, the disruption of travel and stuff like that. And this has actually been the longest time I've been away from the Philippines. And I think that's actually in a lot of the works that I'm making. I think there are two types of distance that, my practice or I have to contend with in relation to the Philippines. One is there's that spatial distance, and there's also the temporal distance. So one of them is physical, but the other one is I'm separated by time, and in a way that's more enduring.
Yeah.
When a place stops being just a place, but a site of memory.
Right.
And so because of that, I think there's a sense of longing and a sense of melancholia that follows all the marks and the works that I make recently.
Right. Well, that's, I think that for somebody who used to come home several times a year, not being able to come for years, it's a bit, Pio, any?
Well, I think for me that there's distance that in two ways. So distance in the sense of my practice, like there's a sense of clarity that distance provides. When you move back from an object, that's when you see the contours of that object properly. And in some sense, like my work deals with so many kind of interwoven, quite complex relationships, and to be able to step back and have the space. And I am aware that living in London is a kind of privilege, to have the privilege of that distance and to be able to really understand the contours of whatever I'm talking about, I think has been really important. And that distance also then allows you to understand how these things are related to other things that might not be related to the Philippines immediately, right? So it's about building these. So in that sense, distance is productive. But in another sense, I haven't been home since October 2018. And there was a point where I would go home every 8 weeks when I think we were working on various projects. So that has been tough. So distance is kind of a double, it permits certain things, but it's certainly like, it also gives you a sense of loss. And
Right.
It's just about, I think the past 18 months has just been about navigating those two things.
Right. So, and now I want to reverse the question to James. So James, on the reverse, you are now in the Philippines, which is a place that is unfamiliar to you. Why?
Why is it unfamiliar, or why
did you come back?
I think as an artist, you're always trying to find motivation, and you have to have things that influence you and experiences that you have in order to kind of filter them and then have them outputted through your work in terms of like your perspective or your experience of them. And, I was in Dubai from like 2006 to 2012, and then New York from 2012 to 2020, and then now here. So I think I like personally stay in like a certain area until I kind of really understand it, and then try to go to like someplace new and try to understand that also. It's just a way of like, building these experiences and also kind of understanding the world around us. And I think like also, if there's any place in Asia that I'm going to work from, obviously it's going to be, the Philippines, and this is going to be the place where I have connection to, my parents are from, and it makes sense for me to kind of, understand that and filter that into the work.
What was it like working in Dubai? I mean, I've had some experience, obviously, showing and very short moments of being in Dubai. But I was wondering what it is like to be in a place like Dubai, where obviously the Philippine diaspora is it's so present, and it's actually it's situated in every aspect of social life.
It
So I wonder
was,
what
yeah,
that was like.
it was interesting. I mean, it was bizarre because like 2006, there was maybe only 3 galleries.
Mhm.
There was no art scene. By the time I left, there was over 2 dozen.
Yeah.
So like really, for me to kind of open a studio and have my practice there was very fundamental to me and like how I developed as an artist, because I was just in this network, in this community that was really trying to build the art scene. And you
Mhm.
think like, you know, everybody knows what somebody from New York is, people know what people from London are, but the identity, like the cultural identity of Dubai was just starting, you know, and is still like developing. So you start to see like the strong ties between like arts and culture and like, you know, perception of yourself within that culture. And we have like, you know, we'd be at dinner or at conversations, it'd be like somebody from Saudi, somebody from Brazil, somebody from Germany. And the mix of cultures was, yeah, it was great. It was great. I mean, those kind of conversations. In terms of like being a Filipino-American, you know, this is
'Cause
like,
that's another level, right? That's
yeah,
another.
it was crazy because like,
Yeah.
you know, oftentimes I would say I was American because that's kind of where I grew up. And then
Yeah.
obviously the next question is like, no, but really, where are you really from? Is
Yeah.
the follow-up question. And so you start to get like these kind of like backhanded kind of racist or comments, you know. What they want to do is like basically it's like you want like people want to know how to treat you.
Right.
They want to know like how to place
They
you
don't
and how
know
to
how to
pigeonhole you.
navigate.
Yeah, how to
the-
navigate you because they can't like understand that from like just how you look. They want to just like see like how they're supposed to be talking to you, you know. And this is like again, this is like how I started getting interested in these kind of cultural systems because it's just like, why does somebody think like that? Like, where does that information come from? Why would they think that? Or why do I think I am the way that I am? And where did that information come from? Because you could have been born someplace else and you'd have a completely different idea of who you were and who somebody else was, but you'd be the same person physically.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, the Philippines, you know, now they have a stronger presence within the arts there. But when I was there and when I was working, it wasn't, you know, there wasn't really many at all. I mean, I was probably the only one. I think like Rachel had like a photography show there once. Yeah, it's limited. But I think they've opened it up now more. There was a lot more prejudice before, but now it's like, I think as the city's developed, they've become like more global and open to like other cultures.
Right. Right. Since we're talking about diaspora, I wanted to extend the conversation and ask you guys if you could think of one other artist, you know, a historical artist or a contemporary artist that you feel really contributes to the Philippine diaspora, aside from yourselves, of course. This is a trick question.
I think you guys will know my answer.
Yes, let's go. Pasita.
And I just saw Tony just put a note about putting Pasita on the global scale. So, you know, I guess one recent development in my practice is actually I've come to represent 2 art practices and to try and articulate, you know, Pasita's incredible body of work alongside mine. And, you know, and when I was talking about Philippine art being at the center of things, it wasn't in any metaphorical way. Like Tate Liverpool just opened a show this week. When did museums open? Yeah, this week. Where, you know, you have 2 Pasita Abadrapuntos in front of an Henri Matisse and with Barclay Hendricks and Wilfredo Lam. We can keep going, like Ellen Gallagher. So actually this placing of Philippine history within, you know, a broader kind of geographic framework is work that's being done.
Right, right.
And we're all kind of allies in making sure that happens, right?
Nicole or James, your artist, if you have any. Huh?
James, you go.
Okay, well, I mean, I think like the contemporaries that I'm speaking to, and it's a lot of them are with the gallery mostly because I'm hanging out with the gallery, and this is like kind of my you know, entry path into, you know, the artist scene here. So, you know, like Corinne, like a lot of conversations with her, Gary, Gregory, Judy, these people that I've met, now Pio and Nicole, I just consider like this like as like a general like table, and we're seated there, and we're having a conversation about what this all means, and a general understanding in terms of like personal, personal and emotional, but also like cultural. So I think like those are the kind of people and conversations that have been, affecting me so far, and I hope to continue that. I think like those are the kind of conversations I was having in Dubai, and I want to have those kind of conversations here too.
Right. Well, we're very happy to have you. James actually built his studio from the ground up. I mean, there was nothing in there.
It was like a raw warehouse.
Where is your studio, James? In Makati, or?
Yeah, it's in one of the spaces in front of the gallery.
Ah, right. Brilliant.
Yeah. Anyway, Nicole?
I mean, I can't really seem to think of like one particular person, but I think that it's definitely, James was talking about the other artists in the Philippines as well as outside. I think all of us together, when we're trying to like push this diversity of narratives, I think that's if we're like approaching it from so many different angles, I feel like in a way that I don't know, that kind of escapes a lot of like the dangerous pitfalls of like that there's one ideal position, there's one correct approach, and there's something as such thing as authenticity. Yeah.
Right. Well, I like what you said earlier about being porous, how you want your work to have many points of entry. And I feel that as Filipinos, not just as artists or people who work in the art world, as Filipinos, we are everywhere. We have many points of entry on many levels. I think if there are, I don't know, 200 countries in the world, we are in like 199 of them. So I feel like I'm working towards the day, as we all are, all of us who are in this boat, who are rowing, waiting for the day wherein people just realize that, oh my God, here we are, and they won't even question why.
I have one more. I think just because I think audiences in Asia, I think need to know more about his work, but the Filipino-American abstractionist Leo Vallador, I think, isn't really talked about so much in the Philippines. I could be wrong, I haven't been home in so long, but this is an artist who was his first group exhibition in New York in the 60s was with Sol LeWitt and Robert Morris. And I think maybe his practice fell into the cracks because it wasn't exploring very specific identity-based work. It wasn't kind of talking about issues of indigeneity, but in terms of actually having a presence at the time when the American avant-garde, ergo dominant narratives in art history, were being formed, he was there. And I think these kind of diasporic voices, which are not necessarily exploring narratives that are obviously Filipino, also need to be raised. Like I think of Lani Maestro being an incredible example as well of someone who's used the language of minimalism, but actually used it to talk about very specific Philippine histories, but also larger histories of various struggles. So, there's one
great artists who people should really know more about.
And I think one thing that I've been interested in is, trying to chart a history of diasporic Filipino artists. What does that history look like? And I've been starting to do that with Pasita, but it's like as you open that gate, what else can be talked about?
Right. There's actually a lot. I mean, from Santiago Bose, who traveled a lot, to somebody like his name escapes me, the guy with the feathers.
Carlos Villa.
Carlos Villa. I'm sorry, Carlos Villa, but yes.
It's actually Leo Vallador's cousin.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's actually a great photo of, I believe it's I don't know if it's Carlos Villa and Santi Bose with Pasita Abad in San Francisco in the early 90s.
And obviously, you know, the late great David Medaglia, we shouldn't really, I mean.
Okay. So this has been super enlightening. If the audience wants to ask any questions, just type them in. I wanted to ask you guys, give you guys like, you know, a minute or two just to talk about what's on your plate now. What are the plans like in the next year or so that we can look forward to? Maybe Nicole, you want to start? If you want to start.
So I have New Contemporaries open for a couple more days. And then after that, I'm going to be showing at a gallery in Copenhagen this August, installing on my birthday, in the gallery called Brigade. And I'm also doing this online show that's happening very soon, next week, with the platform, not a gallery, called Aura Space. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Nicole is also our youngest artist. So she's like our baby. All of us, all our baby. Okay, James?
Yeah, so I'm here, I'm working, preparing for the solo that's opening June 26th at the gallery. Then I have a show currently up, a group show, Light Art from the 1960s onwards, which is happening right now, I think in Jeddah. I have a solo in Boston, I think next fall. So I'll be popping back to the US at that time.
Great. Pio?
I've got a show at the moment at the Whitechapel Gallery here in London, and then a show in Berlin in the summer. And I think I will still be in the Kochi Biennial in December, but obviously the situation is evolving. And then early next year will be a kind of a big, I hesitate to call it survey because it means that I'm getting old, but it's a culmination of the entire Marcos body of work, which I'm bringing together at the Ateneo Art Gallery in the first quarter of 2022. And yeah, so the work hasn't really stopped.
Yeah, so it's going to be a busy year for everyone. I think it's also the time for Rachel and I, as your gallerists, to appreciate the work that you do, not just with us, but the work that you keep doing, you know, elsewhere and throughout the world. I think it's very important to keep this energy going. And this only amplifies what we're trying to do here at home. So with that, I wanted to thank you guys. And I wanted to congratulate you also for being part of Art Basel Hong Kong. This is a historical show, which is happening on site where everyone is PCR tested. And also online. Nicole and Pio, their works are on site, and James's work is online together with our other artists. So that's it. If you guys want to see their work, just visit the Art Basel OVR or the Silverlens website. And yeah, watch out for these guys. They're making big waves.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Nicole, I'll see you for your drink later.
Please. Miss you.
Yeah, I definitely need one.
Okay. See you, James. James, I hope to see you soon in real life.
Absolutely. See you guys soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Good job, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. You did well. Thanks, James. Thanks, Pio.
Yep.
Super pro.
Bye.
Woo! Woohoo! Bye.
Bye.